morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning. Food and Wine Pairing Masterclass from Bibendum, Brakes Chosen Wine Merchants. I'd like to introduce you to Jamie Barrow from Bibendum, one of their wine training specialists from their expert training team, who will be covering this fantastic session today. For those of you who don't know Bibendum, they're London-based premium wine, beers and spirits merchants, specialists in the on and off trade across the whole of the UK. And if you've ever wondered how to pair food with wine and felt a little bit intimidated, then this session is for you. Bibendum got a portfolio of 260 wine producers, and over 90% of them are exclusive to Bibendum, and we're absolutely delighted to be collaborating with them to bring you a fantastic range of wines, which are available from the Brakes website. Today, Jamie will be covering a few easily understood principles to help you navigate what can seem like quite an intimidating world of food and wine. We'll be demonstrating a few fun food and wine activities that you and your teams can do, and highlight some perfect pairings, taking you through some great suggestions for some on-trend wine styles. Just to let you know, this was a pre-recorded session, so we'll be playing that recording to you very shortly, and then Jamie will be online afterwards to answer any questions that you might have in the live Q&A at the end. We've also got some fantastic resources to share with you at the end, to kind of help you in your wine and food journey from here, plus some information on the other webinars that are yet to happen in the event and where to watch back the ones that have happened already. You can submit any questions that you have using the Q&A function on your Zoom menu bar, so do feel free to ask any as we go, and then we will answer them at the end. But in the meantime, please sit back, enjoy the session, and yes, we'll speak to you at the end in the Q&A.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining the Bibendum by Brakes Perfect Pairings Food and Wine Masterclass. So before we get into it, I'll just very briefly introduce myself and give you an overview to today's content, so you know what's coming over the next 15 to 20 minutes. So my name's Jamie Barrow. I'm a wine educator for Bibendum Wine, who are one of the UK's biggest wine suppliers to the on-trade, hospitality, as well as the off-trade, so you know, supermarkets and independent wine merchants up and down the country. And it's my job to just spread a little bit of the wine joy, a little bit of the wine love, and help people out in the hospitality trade get to know a little bit about wine, including food and wine pairing. It's one of the sort of key topics that a lot of my students are really keen to know more about. Obviously, it can be a little bit of a minefield if we think about the tens or hundreds of thousands of different wines, wine styles, different grape varieties and regions, and then we throw into the mix the millions of different potential dishes that we could pair wines to. It can be quite an intimidating place or intimidating topic to try and get your teeth into. So the aim really of today is to give you basic principles. So understanding what's in a dish, understanding some of the elements of what makes up a wine's flavor, and sort of bringing that together so you can apply some very sort of top line principles to make some pretty well-educated guesses as to what kind of food and wine pairings will work really, really well. And I've got a really interesting exercise that you can do after the webinar, so something you can do at home, a little sort of taste test that you can do, which will really showcase the impact that food can have on a wine's flavor. So something fun for you to do afterwards, a little bit of homework perhaps, but then we'll move on to I'll cover some signature dishes, some of the sort of more popular dishes, I suppose, in the UK, and some potential wine pairings that will work really, really well with those. And to cap everything off, we'll be looking at some on-trend wine styles, food-friendly wine styles as well, obviously, to fit the theme. So giving you some tips on things to look out for that should work from a commercial point of view as well. So I think we'll just get straight into it. So I'll share a couple of slides which will take us through the content today. And the first thing we need to do before we start delving into the intricacies or specifics of, suggested food pairings is looking at the basic stuff. So the 5 basic tastes, the things that our palate perceives. So I've lumped these together into 2 groups, the green group and the red group. The green group being salty and sour tastes. So we perceive salt and sour on our palate. And by sourness, we're talking about acidity in food. So think about vinegar, vinaigrettes, lemon juice, things you might squeeze on, your fish and chips. So that's a sour sensation. Salty foods, well, the easiest example is table salt. We often season our food whilst cooking or indeed at the table. So those 2 are in green, and they're lumped together because they are wine friends. We like these when it comes to wine pairing. And on the slide, you can see the impact that salty or sour tastes have on wine. So if you eat something salty or something with an acidic sour element, the resulting impact on the wine is that it'll be richer, the wine will taste fruitier, and it'll taste a bit softer and more easy to drink. All positive things, I think we can agree. The second group, the red group at the bottom, those 3 final tastes, we've got sweet, we have bitter, and umami. Now, umami, I'm sure many of you know what that means, but if you don't, it's a Japanese word which translates as deliciousness. Obviously, that's a little bit abstract when we think of the other tastes, but essentially it's a pure savory sensation. That's what we mean by umami. So to give you an example of a purely umami food, think of an egg or a mushroom. So eggs and mushrooms, they're not salty, they're not sour, they're not sweet, and they're not bitter. So what are they? Well, they're purely savory or umami. Now, sweet, bitter, and umami foods are what I would call wine challenges, wine pairing challenges. You can see the resulting impact of those sensations if you taste a wine after eating some foods with those elements in. So our wine can taste a little bit thinner, possibly bitter, and a little bit harsh as well. So essentially the opposite to the salty and sour foods that are our wine friends. So when it comes to sweet foods, think of a really sweet food like a dessert. Now, that's why dessert wines exist, because you need a special category of wine to go with a very sweet food, because normal dry or non-sweet wines tend to just not work when it comes to a dessert pairing, because our wine just ends up tasting thin, bitter, and harsh. So the general rule when it comes to a dessert or a very sweet food with a wine is that the wine needs to be sweeter than the food it's being served with. So that's why we have things like port or Sauterne, very famous dessert wines. They're lusciously sweet. They tend to have more sugar in them than the dish. And because of that, we don't get the negative impact of it tasting bitter or harsh. When it comes to bitter foods, think of, like biting into a lemon rind or orange peel, very bitter foods. We tend to not eat too many things that are purely bitter. They tend to have lots of other elements in. So generally speaking, we don't often have to worry about a food being too bitter for wine, because it would have to be really, really bitter. But it's good to mention it and just be aware of it. And then finally, with these umami or purely savory foods, it's not often that you will just go to a restaurant and have a microwaved mushroom or a plain boiled egg on its own. These things are often cooked with other things. So let's take our mushroom. It'll often be cooked in something like maybe a salty garlic butter, something like that. So then we have other things like the salty sensation coming in, which can counteract any negative impact of umami food. But hopefully that's a good starting place for you. So we like salty and we like sour things, sour foods and salty foods. They can really help a wine taste better. And then we just need to be a little bit careful around foods that are potentially very sweet, very bitter, or purely savory. So those are the kind of overriding principles that we're starting with. But we need to build upon that a little bit more, because it's not just the 5 basic tastes that we have to be concerned about. At the top here, we can see we need to consider how spicy our food is. Think about specifically chili heat or chili spice. That's what we're really talking about. You know, thinking of a hot Middle Eastern or Asian dish, has a lot of chili in it. And think about the sensation that that has in your mouth. So you eat something very spicy, it burns the inside of your mouth. You have this hot burning sensation. And now we need to think about the wine element. So the key really is the alcohol in the wine. If you have a very high alcohol wine, you can also have a little bit of a burning sensation on your palate. Now, what tends to happen with spicy food and very high alcohol food is they start layering one on top of the other with that burning sensation. So you get a few mouthfuls into your spicy dish, a few, sips of your high alcohol wine. So we're talking, 14 or 14.5% alcohol wine. Your mouth starts to sort of burn. It's a little bit on fire. You might get red in the face. You might start sweating. Most people aren't going to find that a pleasant sensation. So we need to be aware of chili heat in food. How spicy is the dish? If it has got a lot of chili in it, if it's very hot, we need to look at lower alcohol wines, essentially, that aren't going to add more of a burning sensation. So looking at that, 10, 11, 11.5% alcohol wines will be better matches with spicy foods. And also wines that maybe have a little bit of sweetness, that can also take the edge off chili heat. So that's another consideration to bear in mind. Next point down here, does our dish that we want to pair our wine with, does it have a lot of fat or oil in it? Now, think of cheese, or think of classic fish and chips or deep fried things, very oily or fatty foods. Now the key here is looking for wines that have a refreshing, mouth-watering quality. Essentially what we're saying is wines that have higher levels of acidity in them. Now acidity in wine is a really, really good thing, and especially when it comes to pairing with fatty dishes. So if we think about eating a sort of creamy cheese or fish and chips or something that's been cooked in oil, that fat sort of coats the inside of your mouth as you're eating it. Now, if we introduce a wine that has a really refreshing quality with that high level of acidity, what it does is it cuts through that fat, it cleanses your palate, it cleans the inside of your mouth, and you have this really lovely interaction where you're eating the fatty food, you've got the richness and creaminess of the food perhaps, or the oiliness of the food, and then it's followed by that palate cleansing sensation, that cleaning of your mouth with the wine, and it makes you want to take another bite of food, another sip of wine, and it's that back and forth interaction that works really well. So that's the other thing to consider. Is it an oily or fatty dish? Pair it with a refreshing wine, something that has a real sort of mouth-watering quality, and you'll have a really nice interaction between the two. And then the final point here, which is very, very important, is looking at the intensity of the flavors in the dish. So if we took something that is intensely flavored, let's say, a mild Thai green curry, perhaps. Maybe it's not overly spicy, but really fragrant, lots of other exotic spices, maybe ginger or lemongrass, or lots of intense aromas and flavors. If we then paired that Thai green curry with a fairly neutral wine, let's take, I don't know, a classic sort of Pinot Grigio, refreshing but not intensely flavored. And what we would find is that the food, those sort of ginger or lemongrass elements in Thai cuisine, would overpower the delicate flavors of something like Pinot Grigio. You're not going to taste the wine. So we need to bump that up. We need to choose a grape variety or a wine style that is more intensely flavored, so it can stand sort of shoulder to shoulder with the food. You can still taste the elements of the food and the wine as well. And it works the other way. So if you've got a very delicately flavored dish, think of a green salad, something very neutral. If you then paired that with a really rich, robust, intensely flavored red wine, you're not going to pick up the delicate flavors of the different sort of salad leaves, for example. Probably not the best example there. Not many people will just sit in a restaurant eating a green salad, but hopefully it illustrates the point. We want to essentially match intensity so that the food doesn't overpower the wine and the wine doesn't overpower the food. So really, really important considerations to take on board, as well as those 5 basic tastes. Now I'm going to demonstrate this exercise that you can try at home. So this is the list of things that you'll need if you want to do this exercise at home. You could just do one half of it. I would say if you're going to do one or the other, the white wine example that I'm going to give you probably has the most impact, but I also have a red wine example as well, which works really, really well. So we're going to demonstrate the impact that food can have on wine using, first of all, a refreshing dry white wine. So I'd recommend you pick something like Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio, perhaps. I'll show you the wine I've picked in a moment. And the food that we're going to taste with that to demonstrate or illustrate the point is a lemon wedge and something sweet. So it could be grapes. I've got a strawberry. It could be fruit pastels. It could be a biscuit. It doesn't matter as long as it's quite sugary. It's got a really sweet element. And then for the red wine demonstration, you'll need something rich and powerful and bold. I'd say Malbec or Shiraz is perfect. And then a couple of cheeses to pair that with. So we'll talk about the sort of wine and cheese pairing. So I'm just going to quickly stop sharing these slides so you can see better what I'm going to be sampling today. So refreshing dry white wine for our first exercise. Now I have, I suggested Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio, which are perfect. However, I wanted to showcase something a little different. So I've got the Domingo Martin Albarino, which is one of the Bibendum by Brakes wines that are available. So this is a great alternative to Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc. So if you're a real fan of those wines, or if you at work on a day-to-day basis interact with those kind of wines and you've never heard of Albarino before, I recommend checking it out. So Albarino is our grape variety. It's a speciality of Rías Baixas, which is a wine region in the northwest of Spain, in the Galicia region. It's by the coast, the western coast, and they really specialize in this style of wine and this grape variety. And this grape variety is starting to gain traction. It's one of our trendy wines that's on the up. So if you've never tried it before, I highly recommend it. So here we have it, our Albarino, and I've got my little plate of samples here, things that you'll need for this exercise. So what we're going to do to show the impact of acidity on wine, we're going to start with our lemon wedge. So the process is going to be, if you do choose to try this at home, is you're going to take a sip of the wine, just get a feel for it, hold it in your mouth, taste it, and then what you're going to do is suck on the lemon wedge and then taste the wine again immediately after. So essentially like this. This is the fun part. So really enjoy that mouthful of wine. Notice how it makes your mouth water, the feeling of it. This is a very dry white wine, but it's got these lovely sort of fruity peach flavors. Beautiful wine. So I'd highly recommend you go out and get a bottle of Albarino. So step 2, take your lemon wedge. This is not so pleasant, but it will illustrate the point when we taste the wine again. So suck on your lemon wedge. Oh. And then straight back in with the wine again. And the impact is amazing. I really do hope you try this at home. So this is a dry white wine. It doesn't have any detectable sugar in it. However, as soon as we suck on that lemon wedge and taste the wine again, it almost tricks your palate into thinking there's sweetness in the wine. And it has this explosion of really sort of rich peach and juicy, sort of almost tropical fruit flavors that weren't there before. Incredible impact. Now, the next stage is, unfortunately, we're going to show one of our wine challenges. So like I say, you just need something sweet. I've got a strawberry here. They're in season and very delicious at the moment. But you could use a grape, you could use a fruit pastel, a gummy bear, whatever you want. So now what you're going to do is take a bite of your sweet food. Take your dry, refreshing white wine and taste it again. Now, there is still acidity in a strawberry, which, as we said, is a friend to wine, but strawberry is very sweet. There's a lot of sugar in there. And it's, as mentioned before, it's kind of had that opposite effect that we want with our wine. So instead of that almost perceived sort of juicy, sweet fruit flavor that we had after the lemon, now there's a bit of thinness to it, a little bit of bitterness. I noticed the acid more in the wine. It's jumped up. So it's having a detrimental effect on the wine style, unfortunately. So really, if we've got, fruit or sweets or desserts, we are going to be having to look to wines with sweetness in them. So that's the first exercise that you can do at home. Next one is with the red wine. So this, I have actually chosen one of the recommended wine or grape varieties from the slide. So I've got the Argento Malbec here. It's a French grape variety, but it's been kind of adopted by Argentina and they've really rolled with it. It grows fantastically well there, and they've kind of made Malbec their own. It's one of the UK's favorite red wines right now, favorite red wine grapes. So it's a really good one to showcase anyway. But yeah, we've got a fantastic dry, sunny climate in Argentina. It's perfect for getting these really ripe, juicy grapes. So the style of wine is sort of rich and bold and juicy and fruity. So for this exercise, again, I recommend just having a taste of the wine first. Just get your chops round the wine, really soak up the flavor and get a picture for it before going in and tasting it with the food. Okay, so yeah, rich, dark fruit flavors, absolutely delicious. So now let's try it with some of our pairings. So the first thing I want you to do is, if you're doing this at home, is take something like a mild cheddar. It could be a brie or camembert, sort of delicately flavored cheese. So pop that in your mouth. And hopefully you'll notice as well what we were saying about fatty food and how it coats your mouth. So I've eaten that mild cheddar. Now I'm going to taste it with the wine. And immediately my mouth has been cleaned, because Malbec does have good freshness, good acidity. So that's cut through those fats in the cheese and it's cleansed my palate. Now I would say though that the flavor of the cheese is potentially lost a little bit. It's still a pleasant pairing if we think about what's in, the main elements in our mild cheddar. We've got that fat, which we know is good when it comes to wine pairing, and it's very high in salt. Again, we know that salt makes wine taste better. However, it's a mild cheddar, so those sort of delicate nuances of flavor in the food have kind of been lost because the Malbec is so sort of rich and powerful. So the next thing that we're going to try is, now I understand a lot of you might not want to do this at home, is take some blue cheese. So I've got quite a intensely flavored blue cheese, some Roquefort. So I'm just going to pop this in my mouth. And then we'll try the wine again. Now, again, the food is salty, which is positive. It's very high in fat. So again, we've got that lovely palate cleansing sensation, but because it's a more intensely flavored cheese, that flavor carries through with the Malbec. So the wine isn't overshadowing the flavor of the cheese, and vice versa. The wine is strong enough to stand up to the flavor of the cheese as well. So they're working quite harmoniously. Anyway, it's just a fun little exercise that you guys could do at home after this session. Like I say, if you only want to do one, I would recommend the lemon wedge, and the white wine has, really, really strong impact. So do give that one a go. Now, I'll just bring the slides back up, because the next part of today, I just quickly want to go through some signature food and wine pairings, just to recap some of those principles that we've already covered, as well as giving us some specific examples. So some specific dishes and grapes that you can, or wine styles that you can pair those with. So I've lumped together a bunch of heavy or meat driven dishes. So things like the beef bourguignon with root vegetables, roast tops beef, the braised flat iron steak, Moroccan meatballs, tagine, these kind of things. They are heavy, they are richly flavored, they're meat driven. So what do we pair with those? Obviously the classic red meat, and wine pairing is red, and it generally is our go-to. So we'd be looking at robust and heavy red. So we're talking about the intensity of flavors here and the intensity of our wines. So things like Cabernet Sauvignon, the Malbec that we've already talked about, Shiraz, Rioja Reserva, or Chianti. These are great red wines because they can stand up to those dishes. The other thing that these wines have is good freshness, good acidity. And if we think about a lot of red meat dishes, think about lamb. It's a fatty meat. We need some element of acidity in the wine, some freshness to cut through. So one of the sort of very traditional classic pairings is lamb with Rioja. So something like slow cooked lamb tagine with a Rioja Reserva would be amazing. The reason I picked a Rioja Reserva, so I'm going to highlight that word for a second, is that Reserva means the wine has been aged in oak. So an oak-aged red wine such as Rioja Reserva will have lots of spicy, toasty, smoky flavors as well, which will work really well with things like the lamb tagine. And, with a lot of these dishes here, the Moroccan meatballs, roast beef, these sort of smoky, sweet spice flavors from an oaked wine will work really, really well. Now, red wine is essentially the go-to with our sort of heavy red meat driven dishes. However, I do believe that we can pair white wines just as well. And if you think about, a lot of people might not like red wine. So what do we do for those people when it comes to pairing with these heavy meat driven dishes? And again, it comes down to wines that have freshness to cut through the fattiness of the dish, and intense flavors. So I would go for a rich oaked white wine. The classic example or classic grape variety would be Chardonnay from somewhere like Burgundy. So look out for wines like Macon Village or Pouilly Fuissé. These kind of wines will be great matches for heavier meat driven dishes, because of that sort of oaking process. Again, those sweet spice flavors will give you the intensity that you need to pair with those meat driven dishes. So yeah, don't avoid white wines just because it's red meat. So moving on, our next sort of category, broad category of dishes, exotic and spicy. So things that potentially have a bit of chili in them, or more fragrant exotic ingredients, like I say, things like ginger or lemongrass, coriander, those kind of fragrant herbs, spices, flavors. So we've got Asian stir fry, the hake curry, the Indian vegan salad or the vegan thali. So what we need to do here is really match that intensity whilst not going too boozy, because there might be a lot of chili going on here. So we're looking for aromatic and fruity white wines. So we've got Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, and Gewürztraminer. So these are three grape varieties which are they explode out the glass when it comes to their aroma. So really fragrant, really intense, and they'll be able to pair with those exotic spice dishes without having really high levels of alcohol. These grape varieties we tend to see them at slightly lower levels, you know, not often they get much above 12.5%. So they'll work really well here. And again, we can also look to some red wine. So I would recommend something lighter and again, fragrant. So Fleury being a classic French red wine from the Beaujolais region. So Fleury is essentially a village in the area. It's made from the Gamay grape, but it's light, it's fresh, it's got this wonderful aroma, and it'll stand up well to these dishes without being overpowered by the flavors in the dish. And again, something like Montepulciano is a great value alternative, I think, because it's juicy, it's fragrant, but it's not too heavy, not too alcoholic, generally speaking. So again, a nice partner for those dishes. And then the final category of sort of signature dishes that I would lump together are those that are lighter and fresher. Maybe they have a fruity element to them. So the beetroot Wellington with the whipped cheese beetroot raspberry. So like I say, that's a kind of fresh fruity element. Risotto, the vegan grill, which I think has mint and yogurt and those kind of things with it. The sticky halloumi with the orange and fennel salad. So again, these sort of lighter, fresher dishes. We want to match that. So our fruity and refreshing white wine recommendations, the Albarino, the one that I pointed out before, would work really, really well with these. Gavi, which is a little town in Piemonte in northwest Italy. Wonderful wines. They're gaining popularity, even though it's a traditional wine style Gavi. It's kind of having a resurgence right now. And again, it will work really well with, you know, I'm thinking immediately the risotto Milanese with risotto prawns. You know, we've got Italian food, Italian wine. Why not? And then finally got Chenin Blanc, which is another one of my favorite grape varieties. It's got a wonderful freshness, great acidity, makes the mouth water. It's really, really food friendly grape variety. So we would start, you know, initially we think our, you know, white wine pairings with these light, fresh dishes, but we've got reds and rosés that will also work really well. So again, thinking light and fruity for red wines. We don't want anything too robust, too heavy. It'll overshadow the flavors in the food or trash the sort of delicacy of the dish. So we need to look for things that have a bit more finesse. So potentially something like Pinot Noir or Merlot. They tend to be juicy and can often be a little bit lighter. So they won't overpower our sort of fresher dishes. And one of my favorite pairings for pretty much any of these would be a refreshing rosé. So particularly a rosé from the Provence region. I've got one to show you in a minute. But anyway, these sort of delicate, sort of salmon pink colored rosé wines have a lovely red fruit quality to them. So I'm looking at the beetroot and raspberry accompaniment for the beetroot Wellington. You know, the sort of red fruit flavors in a Provence rosé will pair that beautifully. So I think any of these dishes will work with a Provence rosé really, really well. So those are some of the signature dishes and my thoughts on what would make for ideal wine matches in terms of grapes and places. So finally, we've got some food-friendly wine trends to watch out for. So we've got a team of people at Bibendum Wine that look at trends, they look at insights, consumer habits. So we've been looking at what consumers have been doing over lockdown, their sort of wine drinking or wine buying choices. And these are three sort of key things that we've seen in the UK over the past year. So the first one is that people are ever more concerned about the provenance of the wines that they're drinking. Where do they come from? How are they made? Obviously, we're all concerned about the impact that we're having on the climate. So there has been a movement with consumers towards more mindfully or sustainably made wines. And I've got one to show you in a second. The second trend, summer rosé. So summer rosé, again, I've got the Provence rosé, which I'm going to talk about in a second. It's been growing year on year on year for the past decade. People are drinking more rosé now than ever. I think we're starting to see how food friendly it is year round. I mean, I've got summer rosé on, but that's because we're sort of in summer now. But we have seen that consumers have been drinking more rosé year round, but a lot of it in the summer still, as I'll mention that in a sec. And then finally, people are starting to look locally when it comes to wine. So the wine trade in the UK is growing. We have seen more and more vineyards planted, more and more wineries springing up over the last 5 to 10 years. So the industry is really starting to boom here in the UK. And again, a lot of people are looking at the provenance of the products. So they're looking for those local things that haven't traveled halfway around the world, things that are on their doorstep, that are produced locally. So foods and other products, but wine is included in that. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides and just highlight some of these sort of trendy wines that I really sort of recommend and that are really food friendly. So the first one is talking about those, wines made with a little bit of that kind of sustainable or mindful element in their manufacture. So I've got the Jean Bichet Riesling. So this wine is from Alsace, which is in the northeast of France. It sort of borders Germany. And these guys, Jean Bichet, they're a fantastic producer in Alsace. They're really concerned about the health of the environment. They're essentially trying to minimize the impact that producing wine has on their sort of local ecosystem within their vineyards. So they've taken on board a lot of very sort of careful practices to nurture sort of biodiversity in the vineyard. They minimize the use of sort of synthetic chemicals, pesticides, herbicides. They've really moved away from all of that, and they're one of the region's leading sort of pioneering sustainable winemakers in the area. So as well as being sort of ecologically conscious, the wine is delicious. So Riesling is one of my absolute favorite grape varieties. So white wine grape variety usually associated with Germany, but it is grown around the world. And bordering Germany, the Alsace region of France do make a lot of Riesling wine as well. And one of the best things about Riesling is it's a really, really refreshing high acidity grape variety. So it has that wonderful quality that we look for when it comes to food and wine pairing. So think about your fish and chips or your calamari, your deep fried seafoods that you would add vinegar or a squeeze of lemon to. The freshness in this wine mimics that, so it cuts through the fat, makes it a perfect partner for sort of oilier dishes. The other great thing about Riesling is that it's an aromatic grape variety, so it has this lovely sort of fragrant, ripe sort of citrus and stone fruit quality, and that makes it again a really strong partner for dishes that might have a fragrant or exotic element to them. So we talked about those sort of lightly spiced Asian dishes. Again, this wine will work really, really well. And it's not too alcoholic as well. It's about 12% of this wine. So I think we could pair it with those oily dishes or with those really sort of fragrant exotic dishes as well. And it's sustainably made. So there's nothing not to love about this wine. So that's the first trend, sustainably made wines. The next one we mentioned is rosé through the summer and beyond. So I have the Domaine de la Pasteur Provence Rosé. So Provence being Mediterranean France, down on the south Mediterranean coast. And they are really, they're a bit of a one-trick pony. This is really the style that they are known for. But what a style! It is gorgeous wine. Thing I love about rosé is that it combines almost the best of red and white wine. So we've got the lovely sort of refreshing quality that we want from wine, delicate sort of citrus and peachy flavors, but then we get an element of red fruit quality as well. So raspberry, cherry, red currant, really lovely flavors. And it means that it works really well with a wide variety of foods. So yes, we can pair it with salads, we can pair it with seafood, but we can also look to things like cured meat and charcuterie. So, you know, thinking of the summer and thinking of a platter of prosciutto or salami and cheeses, there really isn't, in my opinion, a better wine for those kind of nibbly Mediterranean style lunches than Provence Rosé. So, and it's super fashionable. People see it on a table, they want one as well. So yeah, it's a beautiful wine. One of my desert island wines. I could drink every day if my wife would let me. But yeah, wonderful wine. Highly recommend it. And then finally, our other trend is English wine. So I've got a couple of English wines with me that I'll show you. The first one is a still wine. So this is from Albourne Estate, so Sussex winery. This is made from the grape variety Bacchus, and it's a grape variety you probably haven't encountered much. It has become a little bit of a speciality of the UK because of our cooler climate compared to, you know, south of France, Spain, Italy, etc. We have to look to slightly different grape varieties that can thrive in slightly cooler conditions. So Bacchus is the UK's answer to Sauvignon Blanc. So if you love Sauvignon Blanc, you'll love Bacchus. This wine is refreshing, it's light, dry in style, has wonderful sort of passion fruit and sort of herbaceous kind of aromas. So quite similar to a lot of Sauvignon Blanc, in all honesty. And it comes from, well, just down the road. It's in Sussex. So yeah, fabulous alternative to, you know, more well-established grape varieties from France, Spain, Italy, or Germany, etc. The other English wine I've got to show you is Fitz, which is a sparkling wine. So first of all, awesome bottle. I love the way this one looks like a proper party piece. Great winery, again, south of England. And what we've got here is a wine made, it's a method called Charmat method, which is very, well, to put it simply, it's kind of a Prosecco style sparkling wine. Perhaps a little bit more premium. So this is, you know, this is one for Prosecco lovers that want something a little bit different, something that's a bit local, and maybe a little bit more exclusive, a bit more premium. But it has that lovely sort of delicate frothiness that we expect from sparkling wine, really rich stone and citrus fruit flavors. This is a wine that can be enjoyed on its own as an aperitif, but again, it'll work really well with sort of delicate seafood dishes. So I'm thinking whitefish, you know, if we think of like cod, sea bass, haddock, those kind of more delicate, delicately flavored fishes, or, you know, delicately flavored seafood, prawns, or crayfish, that kind of thing. It'll work really, really well with those. But like I say, I could quite happily sit and sip this in the sun without any food at all, but very food friendly. Again, lovely freshness, so it'll work well with our, you know, fish and chips on the beach as well. So that's my final sort of top wine tip of the day. So you will have all of these slides as content that you can download and take away to remind yourself of some of the food and wine pairing principles. But anyway, the main takeaways from today is we like saltiness and we like sourness in our food. It makes wine taste better. We should be careful of sweetness, bitterness, and really savoury or umami foods. Be aware of high alcohol wines with spicy dishes. Wine is great when it's got high acidity because it cuts through fat, so we like fatty dishes. And then finally, match like for like when it comes to the intensity of the food and intensity of the wine. Make sure you try and pair those up so that we bring out the best in both. You've also got a few sort of signature dishes and food styles with some great varieties that I suggest, so have a look at those. And then finally, we've looked at some sort of key trendy wines to look out for. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this session. I'll be available after you've watched this to answer any questions you may have. But thank you for joining me today, and enjoy sampling some wines at home. I hope you do the taste test with the lemon, the sweet food, and the cheeses. I think you'll have a lot of fun with that. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and speak to you soon. Thanks.
We'll just give it a few minutes then and see if anybody asks anything. But thank you, Jamie, anyway, for your time this morning.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Easier than I expected. That's a good question. Plant-based food is a big thing. Good vegan wines for popular meals such as Italian food.
That is a really good question.
Yeah, so vegan wines, obviously you have to know the thing that makes a wine vegan. It comes down to the production process. So there aren't sort of specific, vegan wines. You have to know the producer. It has to have the little symbol on the back of the bottle or in the wine list. But essentially, what makes a wine vegan is the process of clarifying it. So historically, winemakers, they make their wine and it would be a little bit cloudy. So to get rid of the haziness or the cloudiness, which is little particles of the grape, they would add things such as egg whites, which are still used today, or a long time ago, it would be bull's blood was used. Okay. And essentially, it acts almost like a sieve. It drifts through the wine and the particles stick to it. Obviously, if there's an animal-based product that's used, so like I say, they do still use egg whites, milk proteins, those kind of things are still used, so those wouldn't be classified as vegan. But there are a lot of producers that you will see the vegan symbol on their bottle because they use things like a type of clay earth to clarify the wine, which is 100% vegan. So once you know that, then coming on to recommending with popular meals such as Italian food. Well, first thing to point out, Italian food uses a lot of quite acidic ingredients. So think of like balsamic vinegar, think of tomatoes, like so many Italian foods have that sort of sour component to them, which is great when it comes to wine matching. So first place to look, obviously, is what grows together goes together, that saying. So Italian wines, they have this really refreshing quality and it pairs really nicely with those sort of acidic ingredients. So things like if you're looking at, a tomato-based pasta dish or pizza with a tomato base, look to those sort of Italian reds made from Sangiovese grape, or you can even look to white wines as well. This is something that does get covered in the recording as well, but wines that have refreshing acidity, so that mouth-tingling, mouth-watering sensation. So again, northern Italian whites work really well. So places like Gavi, which is a little town in Piemonte in northwest Italy, really refreshing, works really, really well with those zesty sort of fresh Mediterranean ingredients. But you can look, farther afield. So, a lot of Italian food might use, those more sort of herbal or spicy kind of flavors as well. Thinking, those Mediterranean herbs. So you can look to wines that have that sort of herbal or herbaceous aromatic quality. So again, if we're looking at Italy, great varieties like Verdicchio are great. I think wines like Riesling are very, very flexible as well when it comes to these sort of fresh Mediterranean fragrances and flavors. So Riesling is originally a German grape, but it's grown throughout the world. A sort of very fresh, very aromatic, very delicate sort of style of white wine. It's known for being sort of semi-sweet, but actually lots of dry styles that work really, really well. So yeah, I think it's a case of looking for those wines that have a freshness to them. But if you're looking to pair with vegan wines, you need to know the producer. Coming back to that, there's no sort of set prescriptive X wine is made in a vegan way. It's all down to the producer. So you need to sort of look on the wine list, look on the back of the bottle to work out which wines are vegan. But plant-based meals obviously often get ignored when it comes to food pairing. Red wine pairs with steak and pork and lamb. But I think when it comes to vegetable-based dishes, it's more important about the other things that they're cooked with. What seasonings are there? Are they char grilled? Do they have a really smoky quality to them? Which is really, really important with wine pairing. So I'm a vegetarian myself. So yeah, I love red wine. So I look for those bolder, sort of spicier or herbal flavors to pair with those red wines as well. I've got another question.
Yeah, come in.
Moving to use local UK producers to source food where possible. Local wines would work better with the food than the old Italian French favourites. I don't think they would work better necessarily. Although the wine trade in the UK is growing, it's pretty much the only benefit to global warming I can see is that our climate's come up a little bit. So it's allowing us to make some better wines than perhaps 50, 100 years ago. But I mean, I think there are some really, really food friendly British wines. Again, these are discussed actually in the webinar presentation because it is a really important trend. We are seeing a growing enthusiasm for UK wines. So we have some fantastic grape varieties which thrive in cool climates like ours. So one of them is called Bacchus. So the Bacchus grape is essentially the UK's answer to Sauvignon Blanc. So it's very light, very fresh, aromatic white wine, pairs really well with seafood. So if you've got local, if you're establishment near the coast, you get local seafood brought in, prawns or shellfish or fish dishes. Grape varieties like Bacchus are really, really complementary to those sort of seafoody style dishes. And again, lighter vegetable based dishes as well. We also make some fabulous fizz as well. And I think sparkling wines often get left out a little bit when it comes to food and wine pairing. People see them as a almost like a celebration or an aperitif drink. You drink it before your meal, but actually the UK makes some very food friendly sparkling wines. So I think that there's one that I mentioned in the webinar. It's called Fitz. It's a Sussex based producer, and that's made from a grape called Saval Blanc, which again is really refreshing, has that sort of mouth watering acidity, and it'll pair really well with my classic is fish and chips. So if I'm getting fish and chips from the local takeaway here, I've got some pretty good seafood near me. I'm fairly close to the Yorkshire coast, but English sparkling wines with something humble like fish and chips is fabulous. So I think local wines can work better. But let's say you are let's say you're wanting to pair with some local beef or lamb or pork. These foods do tend to pair quite well with robust red wines. I mean, historically, we've always gone down that route, and robust red wines aren't the UK speciality. You need a nice warm climate. If you think of an Australian red, Barossa, Shiraz, something like that, it's powerful, it's punchy, it's boozy. It's a really heavy wine. We can't produce that style of wine in this country. Our grapes don't ripen enough, and we can't grow those bigger, bolder styles of red wine grapes. So if you have a dish that demands something really robust and punchy, you would actually have to look towards Italian, French, South African, Australian. You would have to look farther abroad. But I certainly think with lighter dishes, summery dishes, seafood dishes, we have some fantastic whites, rosés, fizzes, and lighter styles of red wine. So again, if a summery red, the UK does that. We grow Pinot Noir here. We grow a grape called Rondo. So we've got lots of sort of light, fragrant red wines, which might pair with sort of lighter dishes as well. So it does depend a little bit on the food, whether you would steer people towards pairing with a local wine. But yeah, we can do pretty much everything other than big, boozy, alcoholic red wines. We just can't make those at the moment. But yeah, great questions.
So Jamie, I think we've had one come through the Q&A actually.
Oh yeah.
So food to go has grown during the pandemic with more eating outside. Small bottles of wine are available, but what about the canned varieties? Are these a good alternative?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've got the small but perfectly formed canned range, which we do. And the vessel that it comes in really doesn't have much of an impact. So I think drinking directly out the can, I probably wouldn't do. I think that might spoil the effect somewhat. But yeah, I mean, we do things like a Malbec in a can and a Zinfandel Rosé. Those kind of signature, very very popular, very commercial sort of grape varieties. So canned wine, it is on the rise. Again, it's something that is mentioned there's a trends and insight document which you guys can download via the QR code, and we are seeing, like you say, that food on the go trend is growing. And I think canning wine or putting it in small bottles doesn't have any impact. The quality of the wine stays the same. I think the only time that the vessel that the wine is stored in matters is if you're aging sort of premium wine for 10-20 years. You want it in a bottle with a cork ideally, but or a sophisticated screw cap, which do exist. But yeah, the canned wine options are growing, and I think if you pop the can and pour it into a tumbler or one of those plastic wine glasses, it's just as good as those little sort of single serve bottles, which are also really really popular.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question. But yeah, I think the canned varieties are a good alternative anyway. Again, talking about sort of sustainability and people's move towards ecologically friendly alternatives. Can production has a much lower impact on the environment than glass production. So it takes a huge amount of energy to create a glass bottle. And even though glass bottles are infinitely recyclable, which is fantastic, that initial production is not very ecologically sound, whereas can production is a lot more beneficial. Sort of transitioning to a can is a lot more beneficial to the environment. So yeah, I think it's a great alternative. Doesn't affect the taste of the wine. It's convenient, can on the go, pop it open. You don't need you don't need to be carrying around a corkscrew. You don't need to be struggling with screw caps. You just pop the can. So I think it's a great alternative, and I think we'll see a lot more canned wine.
That's great. That's a fantastic consideration, actually, that I think most people wouldn't necessarily recognise. Just a few other questions then, if that's okay. I've got some new starters in my team. What are the key things I could do to kind of get them up to speed on wine? I guess it does feel like a bit of a minefield of a topic.
Yeah, I think obviously you might have a new starter that's worked in the hospitality trade before and know a little bit or comfortable around wines, but you have to look to those much younger people that might be coming into the trade for the first time. Wine is seen as a very academic subject. I turn up to training, people expect me to turn up with a monocle and a 3-piece tweed suit. It's got this people basically think that a barrier gets thrown up and as soon as wine is mentioned. But I think the first thing to do with a new starter is make them realize that anyone can talk about wine, and the best way to talk about wine is in the simplest possible terms. So what I would recommend, anybody, any manager or duty assistant, shift manager, if you've got new starters, what I would do is pick a couple of key wines, maybe stuff that you have by the glass, and pour your new starter a sample. If they're underage, they could smell it. They don't necessarily have to taste it. I have taught some 17-year-olds recently, so yeah, just be aware of that. But main thing is exposing people to wine. So these young people that are new, to your business, they might not drink wine. They might have never tasted wine before. So I think it's exposure to it. Yeah. And, open that by the glass. If you've got a bottle of Pinot Grigio that you serve by the glass, pour a sample, let them smell it. Ask them what do they think it smells like? And if they say, it smells like wine, that's absolutely fine. Just give them a couple of pointers, look at the back of the bottle, look at the description. If it says it's citrusy or lemony or something, that's it. That's all they need to do. They need to be able to, if a customer asks them, what's your Pinot Grigio like, or what's your house wine like? Oh, it's quite citrusy, lemony. There we go. That's all, people want to know. It's a bit of confidence and in discussing wine, and that confidence comes through exposure. So let your staff smell or taste a wine. Give them just a couple to focus on so that they've got a recommendation in their back pocket, and choosing those wines which are popular. So if you sell stacks of Sauvignon Blanc, tell them, a couple of words about Sauvignon Blanc, and just tell them focus on that one. Or, if it's Malbec's so popular, make sure they've got that in their back pocket. So if someone says, what red do you recommend? Oh, the Malbec's very popular. Again, it's 2 seconds and they've said something positive about the wine without committing to, reeling off a load of, silly wine speak that is beyond most of us. So keep it simple, expose them to it, let them have a smell and a taste. And that should be a really good place to start, just to get that confidence up.
Are there any key trends for the rest of the year to look out for, Jamie? That's another question come through.
Yeah, I think the main ones are covered in the insights document. So we at Bibendum, we do have an insights team whose job it is every year to look at what's up and what's coming. So the big ones are sort of UK provenance. So local wines are on the up. So we've sort of touched on that already. Sustainable, or we call it mindful winemaking. So wines that have a nod towards sustainability, less use of pesticides and chemicals in the vineyard, all that kind of stuff. Again, that's in the insights document. And then finally, alternative formats. Again, we've already covered sort of canned wine, single serve formats. So those are the key ones. But I think there are some other trends which we've noticed in terms of specific wine styles or grapes, which are growing. And actually, we're seeing people reverting back to some of the classics. So there's been enormous growth over the past year of people drinking a grape variety called Cortese, which is the grape variety of, I've already mentioned it, Gavi, that northern Italian white wine. So loads of people are drinking Gavi, loads of people are drinking this grape variety Cortese because it's fresh and it's summery and it's really food friendly. Sangiovese as well is growing. So that's the main grape variety of Chianti, a very classic red wine, which, sort of ebbs and flows in terms of its popularity. But we are noticing that Chianti and the Sangiovese grape are creeping back up. And then there's a French grape variety as well, Gamay, which is the main grape of the Beaujolais region in France. Some of you might have heard of Beaujolais. It's a very light, very fragrant, sort of easy drinking style of red wine it's just below Burgundy in France. And I think that's another trend, is these lighter, fresher styles of red wine. So you know, obviously Malbec's been super popular. Cabernet Sauvignon, we know all about that. The, you know, Shiraz, these big, bold, punchy styles of red, you know, they're not going anywhere, but we are seeing that grapes like Gamay or wines from places like Beaujolais, where they're a little bit lighter, perhaps a bit lower in alcohol, the kind of red wine that you could actually drink at a slightly cooler temperature. We call them summery reds. Those are starting to grow. So I think there are some sort of key wine styles and some key grapes. So traditional Italy is making a comeback, and then sort of lighter, fresher styles of red wine as well are growing. So look at those lower sort of alcohol reds. I think those are going to be really, really popular over the summer and the rest of the year. And it's interesting what you talk about in terms of mindful wine, Jamie, because that's very much a trend that we see coming through in food trends as well, actually, covered by the CGA in their webinar a week or so ago, which actually people can catch up on as well. On the Brakes event site on brakes.co.uk. So it's interesting seeing actually that some of the trends across wine are similar to what's happening in the food world as well. Yeah, I mean, people are concerned about what they're putting in their bodies, whether it's food or drink or wine specific. And I think it feeds into that awareness of, you know, the planet and you know, global warming and all this. So people are more increasingly more concerned about where the food and wine comes from, how it's made. You know, are producers being sustainable? Are they doing their level best to minimize their impact? So yeah, I think it's a really important trend, a really positive one. There's some key producers in that trends document, so you can sort of make some informed decisions. In fact, some of the English producers are really hot on it, and I think because a lot of these, you know, the English wine trade is sort of, even though we've been making wine here since Benedictine monk, you know, hundreds of years, centuries we've been making wine, but it's only recently that it's really started to take off. We don't have a historic wine culture like France or Italy, so we've got lots of these young up and coming wineries, and they're coming in at a time where, you know, sustainability is key. So I think the UK wine trade has already got a really good handle on producing wine with minimal impact. So I think UK wines are a great place to look as well, not only from the local provenance standpoint, also, you know, really, you know, hot on sustainability as well. Yeah. So I guess leading on from that then, has Brexit had an impact on the wine market, do you think? In terms of sort of individual consumer trends, maybe marginally, but I mean, you go to any supermarket or wine merchant and still the majority of wine comes from elsewhere. I think, you know, from a logistical standpoint, it's, you know, it's not made our lives easier. At the end of the day, a huge proportion of wine that we import comes from the EU. So Brexit has sort of thrown up a little bit more red tape, but from a consumer standpoint, marginally, I suppose, you know, people are looking to British a little bit more, but that was happening prior to Brexit anyway. So I wouldn't say it's a massive impact. Marginal, I would say. Yeah. I think that's all the questions that have come through then, Jamie. So thank you so much for answering those. I guess as we were saying before, we'll make this webinar and the recording of it available on the Brakes event site. It will also be on YouTube as well. So to go and visit it, you just literally go on to the Brakes website, follow the link to the event, and you'll be able to view it from there. But thank you so much for your time today, Jamie, and for answering those questions, which gave some additional insight, I think, to the recording. So please do go and watch it. And as we mentioned, the resources are there to be able to download from the QR code at the end. So thank you for everyone that's jumped on and attended today. Do send your details over, and if you watch the webinar and do have any questions, fire them over and they'll make their way to me and I can answer those. Thanks for the kind comment there, Emma. And also do watch the video. There's a really fun activity that you can do at home which really highlights the impact that food has on wine. It's a real sort of light bulb moment. So watch the video. I'll give you a little instructional sort of section in it, which shows you how to do this food and wine matching. So I'd say do watch it, and then go away, buy a couple of bottles of wine, and there's a few nibbly bits you need to get. But yeah, it's a really fun exercise, and it's a good excuse to open some wine. So
definitely.
Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming along, and thank you to Jamie for your time as well, and your expertise. Hugely appreciated.
Thank you, Fran.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for watching.
Have a great rest of the day.
Cheers, you too.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye.